Ready? On Christmas Eve, the young people in our churches everywhere gather in costumes to bring this living tableau of the birth story. They attempt to bring a tale about people who have come from many walks of life, bringing gifts, and they bring questions. And the characters move towards a promise, they move towards a vision, a healing presence, a source of wisdom and peace, and the answer. They're looking for an answer, always an answer. We recognize that road they're on because we trod that road ourselves. They're guided by a star, a presence of angels, and even sometimes an innkeeper pointing to a way that is less difficult and more inhospitable. And so once again this year, that star is hanging over the promised place where your innocence, your trust, your desire for that connection with the essence that represents all that is good and pure waits impatiently within you to be born again. And again, and once more this year, again. It kicks, it turns inside you, and you want to see it, you want to know it, and you want to feel it as something real and tangible, faith-giving life, life-giving faith. And maybe this year those questions, the many questions, won't crowd out this particular manger scene of renewed faith. Maybe this year the knowledge that you can do all things through the strength of faith will ring out as true and just this year. Maybe this year that thing, maybe like a small that girl wearing the gossamer wings made of foil and pipe cleaners, maybe you can walk that kind of faith down the aisle knowing full well how childlike and unsophisticated it is, but knowing how well it leads us to Bethlehem again. Questions. John the Baptist appears at Jordan shore. He's come to baptize, to warn, to tell of the coming of Christ. His answer is about bearing good fruit worthy of repentance. He's saying, if you were to stop, turn around, and look at what you were doing in your life right now, would it bear the good fruit of a life that was lived well? You know that answer. Questions. The passage from Luke depicts people from all walks of life asking questions. The questions might be a lot like ours today. First, the crowds are asking, what should we do? What are we supposed to do? They might ask, and he has the answer. Whoever has 2 coats must give one to someone who does not have one. Whoever has food must do likewise. And I think we know from watching the news in the last couple of weeks and being very directly involved in this time of fear and doubt about the question of who is our neighbor, we know with whom we must be sharing more than a coat, but a place. And then when the tax collectors ask, teacher, what should we do? He answers them by telling them not to collect taxes in a way that lines their pockets. And next, soldiers also question him, what should we do? John has an answer. He says, don't extort money by threats of false accusations and be satisfied. And still the questions come. Now the questions are about the Messiah. Is it John standing there in the river baptizing us? Who is the Messiah? What do we expect? What should we believe about this story? Is the answer right under our noses and we can't even see it? Or is it really just best to keep a very rational attitude about this Messiah thing at all times? Questions. There were questions in the early church, too. How to behave, how to treat each other, despite all of the different ways we are from each other. Once upon a time, I like Bible stories that start once upon a time. There were a couple of really strong church women who got into a big old church fight in Philippi. True story. These women got in a church fight that was so bad, the word got back to Paul in jail. And his response, in part, makes up that reading from Philippians that we heard today. He's writing to 2 women who got into a big old brawl. He writes to answer their questions, and he writes to them to look for peace. Peace between them and peace within each of them through their faith. In all of the wealth that lies around us, would that we knew the means of using our resources in the ways that our faith tells us is just and honorable and right. A church writer, Harold C. Warlick, writes, Philippi was a wealthy city. In many ways, it was Rome in microcosm, as part of a Roman province that was rebuilt by Augustus and repopulated with Roman soldiers, Philippi was given the legal character of a Roman territory in Italy, the very highest honor ever bestowed on a provincial city. In many ways, the Philippians, he says, were like Americans. Their culture was too wealthy to think about the need for a deep faith. Unlike in the rest of the world, women in Philippi held high civic offices and served as priestesses in society at large. Money and social status enabled women to play prominent roles in the early Christian congregations in Macedonian provinces. The Philippian church was obviously as socially diverse as any in early Christianity since early Greek and Roman oratory. It was common not to mention women by name unless they were financially notable. We know many, many women's names from here. They were notable. And so then we have to ask ourselves, what about our own history as a church? Because the church, Protestant or Catholic, we have to now recognize and tear this thing down a little, does not belong to men because of any superiority we can claim over a little matter of biology. In fact, it could be argued that it should be taken away from us for gross negligence. And so questions, how do we as men continue to give up our privilege, and how will you as women take your role with grace? And that opens the next question of how do we open this thing up? In a growingly pluralistic country, how do we make room for neighbors whose faith is different from ours entirely? With so much fear in our country right now, how do we do that? I was pleased last week to be a part of a welcome line at the Islamic Education Center in Orange County for prayer and services on Friday with IUCC members and other friends I know. But while we were being welcomed there, and they were so pleased to have us and offered such hospitality in return, while we were there, the mosque in Coachella Valley was set on fire. We are surrounded by fearful people. But the reminder of Advent is that God is near. And Advent people living lives that involve all of the questions about neighborliness, career, age, purpose, relationships, money, bring to the surface of their consciousness their belief that God is near. The questions come, where will I get the strength? What is the right thing to do? How will I live without fear and treat others fairly as well? Where will I find peace? Where will I find rest? Where will I find happiness? How will I find the means to go on? Questions came up for these two women at Philippi, and their names, Euodia and Syntyche, in a way that caused a conflict that made Paul write from his prison cell. And he wrote, "Do not worry about anything. Do not worry about anything. But in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be known to God, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your heart, will guard your minds. And finally, beloved, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is pleasing, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence and if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things." In Jan Karen's Shepherd's Abiding, I admit once in a while to reading Jan Karen, complete syrup, kind of fun. In Jan Karen's Shepherd's Abiding, a retired Anglican priest is visiting a Jewish friend in a retirement home, and the man asks him to stop by again for a discussion about Marcus Aurelius. So I have to stop right here and say, no one ever asks me to do that. The last time I visited a retirement home at Christmas, a resident asked me to fix his ceiling fan. And because I'm tall, I was then asked to put the Christmas tree ornaments on the top of the tree in the dining hall. No mention of Marcus Aurelius ever came up. But then I can't quote him to save my life, but this priest can, and what he says goes to the core of the words we hear from Paul today. Here's a quote from the emperor himself, said Father Tim, and a fine one it is. The first rule is to keep an untroubled spirit. The second is to look things in the face and just know what they are. Paul writes across the centuries and asks us to look for peace, peace between ourselves, peace between our neighbors, and peace within us each throughout our faith. But still, look things in the face, says Aurelius, and know what they are. And it's in this season of fear that we are in, and we can see where that fear is bubbling up from, as well as the season we proclaim is the coming of a Prince of Peace. It's going to be our job now to be the healers. It's going to be our job now to be the bridge builders. It's going to be our job now to know that pithy and devastating thing to say and know to keep our mouths shut when we want to say it. We're the ones who are going to have to make the peace. We have a purpose, congregation. We have a purpose here. We were put in this place for a purpose. We have a reason for being this community at this particular time and in this particular place. And that's why we have such joy today in welcoming new Stephen ministers to the healing ministry of this church. And that is also why it is with great thanks that we take this time to honor those who have served and who have left our Stephen ministry this year. And so I want to ask anyone in this church who has been a Stephen minister and who's no longer serving, if you would just stand at this time and receive our thanks for your ministry. It's why we're happy to welcome new members to help in the shared vision of this community for where we might go next. We've had over 40 new members this year. That's a remarkable year for us. That's why we'll celebrate a big step today as our building task force completes their job and presents our church with a conditional use permit that will allow us to build a new legacy for our next generation. Take a look at the big rendering that's outside today as we toast. We light the Gaudete candle, the pink candle of joy in this Advent season. The Christmas pageant tells a story about people who have come from many walks of life, bringing many gifts and many questions. And they are us, moving towards a promise, a vision, a healing presence, a source of wisdom, hope, peace, and joy, and love. And the answer, always an answer. We are Advent people traveling towards Bethlehem. Our wings may be foil and pipe cleaners or our shepherd robes made of burlap. But still we're guided once more this year by a star, a presence of angels all around us, even those who point the way that is more difficult and less hospitable. Keep an untroubled spirit. Look things in the face. Know what they are. A lot of what's out there right now is not too pleasant to look at. They are the metaphors, though, and the symbols, sometimes large and impressive, are so homely and homemade that only a child would entertain them as real. They point the message of Advent that says, God is near. And so once again, our star hangs over the promised place where your innocence and your trust, your desire for connection with that essence that represents all that is good and all that is pure waits impatiently within you to be born again, God with us, Emmanuel. Keep on doing the things that you have learned, received, heard in me, says St. Paul, and the God of peace will be with you. Amen.